Montana Territory, late spring of 1880. Just outside the town of Red Bluff the wind carried the scent of pine and dust, and the sound of hooves came fast up the ridge. Delia Freeman had just finished hanging the last piece of her son's wash on the line when the sound stopped her cold. She stepped off the porch of their small, weathered cabin, squinting into the sun. Her heart always braced at the sound of horses. Too many men had come riding with promises, and most rode off with more than they left behind. But this rider slowed. He dismounted with purpose, not swagger tall, broad-shouldered, with a rifle slung across his back and a gentler look in his eyes than she expected. Dust clung to his coat, but his boots were polished, and his hat came off the moment he saw her. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady but soft. "Name's Flint Sawyer. Sheriff down in Red Bluff sent me. Said you were looking for help fixing your fence and hauling in wood." Delia wiped her hands on her skirt. "That was over 3 weeks ago. No one came. I was up north, tracking a cattle thief through the bitterroots. Just rode back in yesterday." He offered a slow nod. "Still need the help?" She looked him over again. Calm eyes. No liquor on his breath. No smile that lingered too long. He looked reliable, but she had learned not to trust anything that looked like hope. "I pay in stew and a clean bed in the barn." She glanced toward the broken fence where her chickens kept escaping. "If that's good enough." "That's better than most," Flint said, already tying his horse to the post. Inside the cabin, her son, Colton, peeked out from behind the curtain. He was 8, tall for his age, with the same sharp cheekbones and wary eyes Delia carried. "Is he staying?" Colton asked. "For now," she said. "But you do not have to talk to him unless you want to." Colton nodded, disappearing back to his books. Flint worked until sundown. He fixed the fence, chopped enough wood to last a week, and even repaired the back hinge on her porch door without being asked. He did not ask questions, and he did not try to charm her. He just worked with quiet focus and long, steady movements that reminded her of the men who used to work the land before everything turned to dust. That night, she set out 2 bowls of stew on the porch. Flint sat on the top step, hat in his lap, waiting until she sat beside him. "You got family?" she asked. "Had a brother. Lost him in the war." She nodded. "I lost my husband 4 years ago. He left. Never wrote. I do not know if he is dead or just gone." Flint dipped his spoon slow into the bowl. "That can feel worse than death." She did not answer. The silence pressed between them, but it was not heavy, just real. Colton crept out with a blanket and curled up at the foot of the porch steps, near enough to hear but not join in. Flint noticed, but said nothing, just tipped his head once. Respectful. By the 3rd day, Colton started following Flint around the yard, pretending to carry tools or asking questions about the rifle Flint kept slung over his back. Flint never pushed, never coddled. He just answered plainly and let Colton set the pace. "He likes you," Delia said one evening as she handed Flint a tin cup of coffee. "He is a good boy," Flint replied, watching Colton chase a chicken back into the coop. "Smart, careful. You raised him right." Delia sat down beside him, brushing her hands over her skirt. "He has not had a man around in years, and the last one before that." She stopped. "You do not have to explain," Flint said quietly. "I know what some men are." She looked at him then, really looked. He was not handsome in the way young men were. He had lines around his eyes, a scar at his jaw, and hands rough with work. But he had steadiness, kindness, that rare kind of strength that did not need to be loud. "I do not let men stay long," she said. He turned to her, eyes steady. "I am not asking to stay." She felt her breath catch. Before she could speak, Colton came running up the porch with a splinter in his hand and tears in his eyes. Flint took a knee, examined the boy's hand, and said, "Let me show you how to get it out without making a mess." He cleaned the wound, wrapped it, and gave the boy a small knife from his saddlebag. "Next time, use this to split kindling. Not your bare hands." Colton's eyes lit up. Delia watched them, her heart pulling in ways she had not let it in years. That night, after Colton fell asleep, Delia stood on the porch, arms folded against the chill. Flint joined her, not too close. "I do not know how to trust it anymore," she admitted. "The kindness, the promises." "I do not make promises I cannot keep," Flint said. Then, slowly, "But I can tell you one thing. I ain't ever been a father. But if that boy needs someone to show him how to stand tall and make a life, I'll be the dad he looks up to." She stared at him, stunned. "And you?" he asked gently. "Do you want someone to stand beside you again?" She blinked hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to believe there are men who mean what they say." He reached out, not touching her, just holding his hand open between them. "I mean it." Delia stepped forward. She placed her hand in his, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe. The creek behind the Freeman homestead ran high that week, swollen with melted snow from the distant peaks. Delia stood knee-deep in the water, skirts knotted at her thighs, scrubbing linens against the washboard. The sun had barely touched its highest point when Flint stepped down the slope, carrying a wooden pail of riverstones and a pair of worn boots slung over his shoulder. "You fixin' to wear holes clean through them," Delia said, flicking water from her fingers as he approached. "I've walked worse trails barefoot," he replied, setting the stones beside her basket. "Thought you might want these for the stove. Hold heat longer than split pine." She studied the pile. "Where'd you learn that?" "Old trapper near Fort Owen taught it to me. Said he learned it from a Salish woman he wintered with." Delia wrung out a sheet. "You've been around. Most of it I'd rather forget." He crouched beside her, not reaching for anything, just watching the current slide around her legs. "But I remember the good bits. People who didn't owe me a thing, offering something all the same." She nodded, eyes on the water. "That's a rare kind of memory." Flint didn't answer. He just stayed beside her while she finished, helping carry the damp linens up the ridge without being asked. When they reached the porch, Colton was sitting cross-legged in the shade, whittling a forked branch. "Trying to make a slingshot," he said without looking up. Flint set the basket on the bench. "That stick's too dry. You need green wood, or it'll snap when you pull." Colton frowned. "Ain't any trees nearby with low branches." Flint knelt, pulled a small drawknife from his coat pocket, and handed it over. "Tell you what, I'll show you how to carve a proper one from willow. You help me oil the tack this evening." Colton's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Then he gave a single nod and took the tool. Delia leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You always carry tools in your coat like that?" "Only the useful ones." Flint straightened. "Never know what you'll need out here. You planning on staying past the week?" He met her gaze, the air thick between them. "I was hoping to." Delia stepped off the porch, brushing past him toward the barn. "Then you'd best show me you can handle more than fences and kindling." Inside the barn, the roof sagged in the back corner, beams blackened at the ends where old rot had crept in. Flint examined the damage, running fingers along the grain. Delia watched from the edge of the stall, her expression unreadable. "I patched it twice last winter," she said. "But the rot's deeper than I thought." "You got a saw and auger?" "In the shed. Some of the teeth are dull. I can sharpen them, and you'll need new boards." I saw a down spruce 1/2 mile east straight grain. Not too wet. Delia hesitated. "That's a full day's work. I'll start at first light." She studied him, eyes narrowing slightly. "Most men wouldn't bother." "I'm not most men." He said it without pride, just plain truth. Later, as the sky deepened to indigo, the three of them sat around the fire pit behind the house. Colton handed Flint a half-finished slingshot, the bark stripped clean. "I tried green wood this time," he said. Flint turned it over in his hands. "It'll hold." "You sand the inside of the fork." "Used a rock." Flint nodded. "Resourceful." Delia stirred the pot suspended over the flames, the scent of stewed beans and salt pork mingling with smoke. Her voice was low when she said, "You talk to him like he matters." "He does." She met his gaze across the fire. "Most don't see it. They're blind, then." The silence that followed stretched long, but it felt like something solid settling between them, not space pulling apart. Flint shifted to poke the fire, his hand brushing hers briefly. She didn't pull away. Colton yawned and leaned against her side, and she drew him close, wrapping her shawl around his shoulders. "He's been waiting for someone to show him how to be," she said, her voice barely above the crackle of the flames. Flint looked at the boy, then at her. "I'll be the dad he looks up to." Delia didn't speak, but her fingers tightened slightly on Colton's shoulder. That night, after the dishes had been scrubbed and put away, and Colton had fallen asleep with the slingshot by his bed, Delia walked Flint to the barn. She held a lantern, the glow casting long shadows across the packed dirt. "I can offer a roof and a warm meal," she said, "but nothing else yet. I still carry too much." Flint took the lantern and hung it on a nail. "I'm not here for what's easy. I'm here because I see something worth staying for." Delia watched the light sway gently. "Don't make it sound simple. It's not. But it's not impossible either." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him. Her voice caught slightly. "I don't know how to lean on anyone anymore." "You don't have to," he said. "Just let me stand beside you." She hesitated, then laid her palm against his chest, just once. His heart beat steady beneath her hand. "I'll try," she whispered. He covered her hand with his own. "That's all I need." Morning came with the scent of dew-damp earth and sap bleeding from the cut spruce Flint had felled east of the homestead. Delia found him already at work, sleeves rolled past his elbows, sawdust clinging to his shirt and beard. He worked with a rhythm that didn't hurry, didn't pause, just trusted the day to give back what labor asked of it. She stepped into the clearing quietly, carrying a tin cup of coffee that had cooled some in the walk from the cabin. "I didn't hear you leave," she said, setting the cup beside his tool satchel. "I didn't sleep long." He wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. "Dreams dragged me out before dawn." She crouched beside the spruce, fingers brushing the damp grain. "What kind of dreams?" He hesitated, eyes scanning the canopy. "The kind you don't talk about unless they wake you twice." Delia didn't press. She stood and walked the perimeter of the clearing, boots sinking into soft needles, and when she returned he was already splitting one of the longer planks with a wedge and mallet. "You ever build anything that wasn't meant to keep something out?" she asked. Flint looked up, surprised by the question. "Not since I was a boy helping my pa set floorboards in a church that never did get a preacher." She grinned faintly. "Then maybe it's time you build something meant to let things in." That evening, Colton sat on the porch rail carving letters into the wood slingshot, tongue tucked into the corner of his mouth. Flint joined him, crouching low to watch. "Whose initials you carving?" he asked. Colton didn't look up. "Mine. And yours." Flint blinked. "You sure about that?" "I ain't dumb," the boy muttered. "Mama's different since you came." Flint sat back on his heels. "Different how?" "She don't keep her coat on inside no more. And she sings when she sweeps." He paused, then added, "She ain't scared like before." Flint leaned against the porch post. "She's not the only one changed." Colton glanced sideways. "You used to be scared too?" Of different things. Flint looked out at the horizon. Like what it'd feel like to stay somewhere instead of just passing through. Colton returned to his carving, but his voice was low when he said, "You should stay. We don't got much, but Mama made this place good." Later, after the fire had burned down to a soft glow in the hearth, Delia sat at the table sewing a tear in Colton's shirt. Flint leaned against the doorframe, watching the careful way she fed the needle through the fabric. "You were trained to do that or just learned from need?" he asked. She didn't look up. "My mother taught me," said a woman ought to know how to hold things together, even if the world's pulling at the seams. Flint stepped closer. "You think the world's still pulling?" "I think it always will." She tied off the thread and folded the shirt. "Question is whether I let it tear me open again." Flint pulled out a chair across from her. "You ever think about what comes after survival?" She set the shirt aside. "I used to think there wasn't anything after. Just more of the same, until you stop feeling it. And now," Delia met his eyes fully, "I'm beginning to think I was wrong." He reached across the table, palm up between them. "Then let's build something that doesn't need mending every season." She took his hand slowly, her fingers trembling before they settled. "I want something that holds," she said. "You already built it," Flint replied. "I just want to be part of keeping it upright." The lamp flickered low, and the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of all the things they hadn't known how to ask for, finally finding form. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of spring wheat just beginning to green in the far field. And inside that small cabin, something rooted itself quiet and deep, too solid to be shaken loose. The first hard frost came early that year. Flint was up before the light, wrapping burlap around the last of the squash in the root cellar, while Delia rolled out dough for the morning's biscuits. The cabin held the chill like it was stitched into the walls, but Colton was still asleep, curled deep in the quilts Flint had traded for in town 2 weeks back. When Delia set the pan on the stove, she glanced at Flint's back where he knelt beside the cellar door. His movements were slower than usual, his shoulder drawn in tight. "You're favoring that side," she said, voice low. He stood slowly. "Old break. Mended wrong." She wiped her hands on a cloth. "From where?" "Fell off a mule crossing the upper Gallatin. Stupid way to get busted up. You push through it every day." He looked over. "Ain't much choice. Things still need doing." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed under her apron. "You ever think about easing some? Letting someone else carry the load a while?" He walked to the basin and poured water over his hands. "I did once. Before things got quiet." Delia didn't ask what he meant by quiet. She just turned back to the stove and dropped the biscuits onto the hot pan, the sizzle filling the room. Later, after Colton had finished his share and gone to check the traps Flint had helped him set along the tree line, Delia walked with Flint out to the lean to where the tools were kept. A thin coat of frost slicked the boards. She opened the door, stood inside a moment, then turned to him. "I want to ask you something, and I don't want you to answer quick. All right? If you had the choice. If you didn't owe me anything, or Colton, what would you be doing right now?" He didn't speak for a moment. Then he stepped inside and rested his hand on a worn yoke hanging from the wall. "I used to think I wanted to own land, my own cattle, my own name on a deed. But a man alone on a wide stretch of dirt, it turns out that's not living. That's just waiting to die slower." Delia stepped closer. "So what is living to you now?" He looked at her, the frost light catching in his eyes. "Sharing something that lasts. A morning like this. A boy learning to trust. A woman who don't flinch when she speaks her mind." She studied him, her breath turning white between them. "So you'd stay even if the land never got easier? Even if nothing came of it but the work?" "I'd stay because of who I'd be doing it with." She touched the yolk beside his hand, her fingers brushing the edge of his. Then I want you to know something. I've been waiting for someone to stay without needing to be begged. I don't need to be asked, he said. I already chose. That afternoon, Colton came running from the woods with something bundled in his arms. Flint met him halfway and knelt as the boy opened the cloth to reveal a jackrabbit, its leg clearly broken. Found him stuck near the old fence line, Colton said, breath hitching. I didn't want to leave him. Flint nodded once. Then we take care of him. They fashioned a splint from twigs and old cotton. Delia watching from the porch as the boy held the rabbit steady and Flint wrapped the leg with careful hands. He's not gonna die, right? Colton asked. He's got a better chance now, Flint said. Colton looked up. That's what you do, huh? Make things have a better chance. Flint ruffled his hair. That's what I try. Delia came down the steps with a small bowl of greens. He'll need feeding till he can move again. Colton took the bowl, setting it beside the rabbit's nest. He can sleep in the shed. I'll check on him every day. Delia handed Flint a tin of liniment. For your shoulder. He glanced at it, then at her. You didn't have to. I wanted to. Their fingers touched as he took it. This time, neither pulled away. That night, while Colton slept near the stove with the rabbit curled in a box beside him, Delia stood beside the table, folding the day's laundry. Flint came in from the cold, the door clicking shut behind him. She looked up and caught the quiet in his expression, the way his jaw unclenched when he saw her. I keep thinking something'll come to take this from me, she said. He stepped forward, close enough to feel the heat of him again. Nothing's taking me. She folded the last shirt and set it down. I believe you. His hands were rough when they found hers, but they didn't press. They just held, steady and sure. I told you I'd be the dad he looks up to, he said gently. But I'm more than that now. I want to be yours too, whatever that means to you. Delia looked up at him, her eyes wet. It means I'm not afraid anymore. He leaned in, and this time, their lips met in a kiss that didn't ask or promise. It simply was a slow, earned thing rooted in every long day they'd shared. When they parted, she whispered, Come morning, we'll need more feed, and I'll want help with mending the back roof. He grinned, not wide, just enough. Then I guess I'll still be here come morning. And he was. The last of the snow melted from the north slope just before the second planting. Flint and Delia stood in the back field, surveying the furrows he'd cut with the plow she'd borrowed from a neighbor downriver. The soil was dark and damp beneath her boots, and she could already see green pushing up from the rows she'd sown a week before. Looks like the beans took, she said, brushing a strand of wind-tossed hair from her cheek. They'll hold if the weather does, Flint replied, his hands resting on his hips. Sky's been favoring us lately. She looked up at the pale stretch above them. I'm not used to that. Things going right without a catch. There's no catch, he said, then added quieter. Not this time. Colton's laugh rang from the edge of the field, where he and their neighbor's boy, Henry, were building a scarecrow from an old coat and a crooked branch. Flint watched the boys a long moment before turning back to Delia. You think he'll have a better life than we did? She didn't hesitate. He already does. They spent the afternoon hauling water from the creek, taking turns with the buckets to save Flint's shoulder. Delia had started boiling liniment leaves into a poultice, and the swelling had eased some. He refused to rest entirely, but he no longer grit his teeth through the worst of it. That was her doing, and they both knew it. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, they sat on the porch steps, boots dusty, fingers stained with soil. Colton was inside, reading by lamplight, the rabbit still hobbling but well enough now to move on its own. Flint leaned back, tilting his head against the doorframe. I never thought I'd find a place where the quiet didn't feel like an ache, he said. Delia rested her chin on her knees. And now it feels like breathing. She shifted closer, their shoulders brushing. You want to stay through the winter? I want to stay through whatever comes after that too. She didn't look at him, just let the words settle between them like seed in turned soil. Then she said, there's a room off the kitchen. I was saving it for Colton when he's older. But he says he wants the loft. Says it feels like a treehouse. Flint turned slightly. You offering me the room? I'm offering you a place that's yours. Not something borrowed or temporary. You sure? She reached over and took his hand, calloused and warm. I've never been more sure of anything. They didn't speak again until the stars came out, thick as spilled flour across the sky. When the wind picked up, Flint stood and offered his hand. She took it, rising with him, and together they stepped inside. The wedding was small. Just the preacher from Red Bluff, the neighbor couple who'd loaned the plow, and Colton, who stood tall as best man and handed over the ring Flint had carved from elk bone and polished smooth over a week's worth of evenings. Delia wore her mother's shawl, the one she hadn't taken from the trunk since before Colton was born. Flint wore a clean shirt and the vest Delia had stitched from leftover curtain cloth. After the vows, they ate stew and cornbread on the porch, the three of them, and laughed until the lanterns burned low. Colton fell asleep in the rocker, a folded quilt over his knees, the rabbit twitching beside him in a wooden crate. Flint and Delia stayed out long after the fire died down. He traced her wrist with the edge of his thumb, and she leaned into the curve of his shoulder. I never thought I'd marry again, she said. I never thought I'd be worth marrying, he answered. She smiled, eyes soft. You were. From the first time you fixed that hinge without being asked. He laughed quietly. That's what won you? No. What won me was how you never needed me to say anything out loud for you to understand. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Then I'll keep listening. Long as you'll let me stay. You're not staying, she said. You live here now. And he did. The seasons turned. The crops held. The barn stayed dry through the storms, and the roof never leaked. Flint taught Colton how to track deer without spooking them, and Delia taught him to stitch a hem that wouldn't unravel no matter the wear. The rabbit lived 2 more years, and Colton buried it near the fence line where he'd first found it. Flint carved a small marker for it, and Delia planted wild mint nearby. Their life wasn't easy, but it was full. They built a smokehouse together, added a second coop, and traded eggs for sugar and flour. Flint never left again, not even when a rancher offered him work 2 towns over. He just said, I've got everything I need right here. Delia never looked over her shoulder after that. There were no more closed doors, no more waiting for the other shoe to fall. Just mornings with warm bread, evenings lit by lamplight and soft words, and a love that had grown not from promises, but from action, patience, and the quiet choosing of one another day after day. They grew old on that land, together,